David, welcome to the Lonely Chapter podcast. How you doing?
We're doing this in real life in London.
We are.
When I entered this building, they heard my accent and everyone started grabbing things in case I stole something. So it's good to be here. Thanks for trusting me with the objects.
Yeah, no, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it. It's great to have you here. So I want to start off with your journey. So you've recently had a big rebrand. So obviously you've changed from Development by David podcast to Origin Story, which I love. I think it looks nice and sleek. Where does your origin story start?
My origin story starts on the Sunshine Coast of Scotland. Obviously that doesn't exist, but we have something close enough to it, which is the West Coast. It's not quite LA or San Diego like the West Coast of California. There's far more heroin and abuse, but less lip filler, which is great.
Yeah.
But yeah, I grew up on the West Coast of Scotland in a council estate. In the neighbouring town my father grew up, which was labelled the most deprived area of Scotland, the BBC made documentaries creating what essentially was a poverty pornography of the area. He grew up in the 1950s and found himself stumbling into the army at the age of 21. He served in the Falklands War and in Northern Ireland. He guarded Buckingham Palace, even guarded Princess Diana's wedding and her funeral.
Wow.
This man had an commendation of bravery for saving lives in a London fire. I just recently learned that he was almost a saviour in the Ebury Bridge bomb attack, which was an IRA bomb attack on Chelsea Barracks in the 1980s. And a young boy, died in my dad's arms, a heroic figure. And I had that as a role model. My mother was the youngest of 6, grew up in a large but poor family, and never left our family nest until her 30s, making her a bit of an older mother. And just generationally, seeing them navigate low-paid employment and unpaid employment gave my sister and I a sense of ambient anxiety and ambient depression, both of which you could place the word financial in front of, because that was entirely the root cause. We grew up hand to mouth. My mum and dad were uplifted by the benefits system, a very cruel system, because every day as a young man I would have to fill out job application forms on a computer for my mother, who wasn't computer literate, in order for her to sustain and receive those benefits. My dad I grew up around my dad, who was an alcoholic. He didn't have the support that he needed leaving the army. He was in war. Young men died in his arms. His brothers died beside him. And in the 1980s, the support system post-military wasn't the way it is now. Yeah. And I think coupled with his really struggling upbringing, which included domestic abuse and child abuse and extreme poverty, alcohol was the only way he could get out of his body and mind. And I was at the epicenter of that as a young person. All I wanted was control. I wanted to control the situation, but I couldn't. And I found myself very nihilistic as a young man until I had a very pivotal moment that shaped the rest of my life. And that moment, Sam, was when Sir Tom Hunter came to my high school. Sir Tom Hunter is Scotland's richest man, Scotland's first billionaire and a global philanthropist. He came to my assembly hall and he showcased his billions, and my ears turned off. I didn't relate to him. I thought he was preaching from the high heavens until he said he was from a council estate, until he said that he was from the same region that I grew up. And my ears turned back on. And I remember so many lessons that he taught me during that session, Sam. One was, be a radiator, not a drain. And the other was, it's better to beg for forgiveness than seek approval. And I remember at the age of 11 running back to my high school class and Googling, what is an entrepreneur, what's a philanthropist? No results because I couldn't fucking spell the thing. But then my high school teacher came over my shoulder and helped me Google it, and I realized that there's someone that can create so much wealth that they can give it back. And that really inspired me at a young age. So I took to the council estate with my meager resources and I started selling desserts around the council estate.
Nice. Making
a little bit of money. And a second crucial pivot happened, which was I was counting the change, the coins, and my uncle said to me, David, you're good at counting that money. you could be an accountant, they make a lot of money. And that was a trifurcation of 3 themes. It was identification of a career that I didn't know existed, the validation of skills that I didn't know I had, and then identification of a reward attached to those skills in that profession that I didn't know existed. He said, you're good at counting money, that was the skill. You could be an accountant, that was a profession. They make a lot of money, that was the value creation. And at that moment, all I knew was drug dealers or dinner ladies on my street or tradesmen.
Yeah.
Now I had insight to this new career. So at that point, I set on a very worthwhile journey to become a chartered accountant, doing all my exams, aided through a social mobility charity that took me to a large multinational, one of the big 4 accountancy firms.
Yeah.
And I had a great time there. I have had an amazing time there. Yeah. Won awards, been recognised, started a social mobility network of 1,200 members.
Awesome.
And that inspired me to start sharing my story in a workplace like that, because most people come from either, or what I perceived as Russell Group universities, private skilling experiences, more often than not Oxbridge. And there wasn't people that sounded like me or looked like me. And I started sharing my story, and that led to more public speaking. It led me to meeting Her Majesty the Queen in 2020.
Wow.
And sharing my story over Zoom. She was my lockdown date.
Lockdown date.
And
it's quite a date.
Yeah, it was quite a date. And loads of people. So it went viral because the Queen's Zoom crashed. And it was on ITV. It was on like CNN. It went global across the world.
Yeah.
And people would reach out to me and say, David, I have a story just like yours, but I wouldn't be so brave to share it. And that inspired my podcast. So I started a podcast in 2020, just after my mum passed away in the very same year, from my council estate bedroom with a £60 microphone. You know the story.
Yeah.
It's the podcast villain arc. And I've just grown it to this point where I've rebranded to Origin Story, because I want to make it not the David show. I want to make it beyond me. I want to signify the message that your origin story is your competitive advantage because no one else has it. So that's the story today.
What inspired that first moment where you said, I'm going to take my story and I'm going to share it and I'm going to start this podcast?
It was when my mother passed away. Young grief is a weird thing. Not to sound tongue-in-cheek about young grief, but it allows you to gamify mortality. You see the implication of death from a 3D lesson, from a front row seat. And I learned that life is too short, and I could really see that ahead of me. Life is too short to be nothing but yourself. Life is not about selling a fake idea of yourself. And when you lose someone so close to you, a mother figure, a parental figure, you get that really firsthand. So I was just encouraged to live life on my own terms. I'm bewildered about how many people want to be proud of where they're going, but are ashamed of where they came from. You can't be proud of where you're going if you're ashamed of where you came from.
Yeah.
And I just embraced that. I embraced the working class council estate mentality and features of my life. I realized they were features and not bugs. And I really think about like the greatest origin stories in Marvel films or superhero films. They all start with trauma and hardship. If you think of Spider-Man, the film doesn't start with him filing taxes and making millions. It starts with him being bitten and being ostracized from the tribe, living with his Aunt May. But I'm bewildered at how many people want the platform, the purpose, the power, but they're not willing to live with Aunt May.
Yeah.
And I realized that at that age that an unknown secret is that you either own your origin story or it owns you. It puppeteers you. And you can use it as your competitive advantage. You can use it as your power. And that's a choice. And I made that choice at that age. And it was because of that young grief experience.
That origin story makes you, doesn't it, ultimately? So you wouldn't be who you are today, and no one listening would be who they are today without going through what they've gone through. There's absolutely no way that you would understand, like you speak about the mortality of life and all of those things. That's the only way you could have learnt it. Well, there's other ways, but
It's the most
that,
ephemeral way.
yeah, absolutely. And it's made you look at life a different way off the back of it. So yeah, I think that's important for people to sort of remember as well. And with the rebrand, you said about you wanted to sort of make it less about you and sort of take it out in that terms. What sort of led to that?
In a world of AI, technology and algorithms, people are starving for the real. Most facets of our day-to-day lives are being automated and outsourced and reduced to rules and computation. And I think the last bastion of humanity is our stories. People think people shape stories, but it's actually the other way around. Stories shape people. And I wanted to share that as a message, that there's no such thing as disadvantage. It's all disadvantage. And this advantage that I have is this podcast, this platform, this story. And I felt, I don't want to sound too altruistic, but I felt that I wanted to share that. Over the last few years, I've been able to meet the most fascinating origin stories and the individual messages that I've received from people that have found solace in either someone like a Jimmy Carr all the way down to someone from Glasgow who they've never heard before. And I realized that I wanted to ship that at scale. And to ship that at scale and to purvey a message that your origin story is your sword and your shield, I had to make it less about me and more about you. And as a result, I've been able to attract the most amazing team. I have Sam Raj, Sam, Andres, and Howie, who all believe in that message too, and they back it and they embody it.
Yeah.
The OS, the origin story, is a sacred symbol to them. Whenever we rock up and meet together on a Wednesday for our team meeting, or we go to London for a shoot, without even saying, we all rock up wearing OS.
Yeah.
And that's because they're bought into the mission. And I want to do that for the listeners too.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a really nice way to look at it. And I think that's the value of podcasts is you're a fly on the wall in a conversation. That's what I always enjoyed listening to was unedited. It's not necessarily an interview per se, but it's a conversation and you get to learn a bit more about the people behind what the message is and you learn lovely little takeaways as well. So yeah, I think it's awesome. And having listened to some of your stuff, it's really cool, man. Tell me a little bit about some of the stuff you do outside of the podcast then. So you've done a bit of stand-up comedy over recent years. Tell me about that experience because that's quite a unique thing.
I want to take that step backward. Stories are not static. I think a lot of people find status attached to their initial identity, whether it's the title on their CV, and they think, well, I'm an accountant now and I'm going to be an accountant forever. Yes, your CV is experience, but your origin story is essence. And that, like Apple iOS, is a iterative software update. And I could have said I'm an accountant and that's all I am. Or I could have said I'm a podcaster and that's all I am. They say that cats have 9 lives. I think humans have more. And they have more when they do more things, when they change their identities, when they're not static. You don't have to live a long life to live a long life. You just need novel and intense experiences. And again, through Young Grief, I learned that.
Yeah.
So I just started thrill seeking.
Yeah.
When I gamified mortality, I realized that I can create a bucket list of things I still have to do, things I still have to say, experiences that I still want to experience. And I thought, why can't I start that tomorrow? So I've almost tried every hobby under the sun. I'm a jack of all trades and genuinely master at fuck all. And one of them was stand-up comedy.
Yeah.
I loved stand-up comedy growing up because it was the truest form of escapism as a young man. When times were really hard in the council estate box room and my mum and dad were shouting and it was alcohol fueled, we had no money, turning on the TV and watching a bit of humour was the way to take myself out of that room. In stand-up comedy clubs, we all recognise the world is shit out there and we can laugh about it in here.
Yeah.
And when I was watching stand-up comedy, I just had this itch to be on stage and do it. And most comedians have either a huge sense of insecurity or unprocessed trauma, or a bit of both.
Okay.
And they weaponize it on stage. And when my mum passed away, I developed my first 5-minute bit. Most comedians start with 5 minutes, and it was all around the end-to-end process of, unfortunately, watching my mum pass away from a heart attack on my hallway in my house. And I'm smiling because I'm thinking of the jokes that I wrote about it. Like for a young man, it should be the most disastrous event. But by putting on these comedic rose-tinted glasses, I was able to process it in a less serious way. And I'm not saying you shouldn't feel emotion. Pain is real. If I were to punch you in the face, Sam, it would hurt, right? You would feel it.
Yeah.
And it's instantaneous. If you were to nip me in the arm, I would feel it. That's not optional, but suffering is optional. Suffering is thoughts. And I could grieve in the traditional way over my mother. Or why don't I write funny jokes about it? Why don't I lambast and make myself the idiot in that situation and crack jokes about it? So I kind of went into that experience doing that, and it allowed me to process that. And I got the itch. It's truly a drug. Telling your first joke is the greatest rush. I can't explain. I've never really taken drugs, but I can imagine it's greater than any drug.
What's it like failing in front of people so immediately? Because this is something I've thought about recently, is we talk about the fear of failure a lot, and it always crops up in conversations I have with people on and off the podcast. And it sort of you then talk about the fear of failing publicly as opposed to failing in your private room. If you messed up in your own bedroom, no one sees it, it's not really a thing. So the fear of failure in public is the thing that causes us to be scared. I think comedians have to be the most comfortable, or the most trained at least, in failing in public, because, as I'm sure you found out, unfortunately, at some point, not all jokes land.
They rarely do, and it's part of the process. And I think in a very polished world whereby we only ever see people's final draft, there's a perfectionist paradox whereby everything that we consume on social media we think hasn't been through a sub-array of filters and crops and distortions. We think that was the instant photo that they just took. And we move towards that through AI as well. There's no room for a reiteration with AI. You put in a prompt, it spits back a PC, intelligent, sensible answer without a second draft. And I think more than ever, if you embrace the work in progress like a comedian, you will have a richer sense of intel, a richer sense of understanding, because you've got all the data points from failure. And I guess the ephemeral feeling of bombing on stage is horrible, because unlike public speaking, right? People say public speaking is their greatest fear. Second is death. Comedy is public speaking on steroids.
Yeah.
Because when you do public speaking, I've done hundreds of gigs of speaking publicly whereby the audience reaction can be empathy, it can be inspiration, it can be motivation, all at the same time. So you can impact the audience in numerous ways. But with comedy, the reaction is so binary. They laugh or they don't.
Yeah.
And there's times where you tell a joke where the whole room is silent. And learning from a guy called David McIntosh, who's the founder of Cards Against Humanity, speaking with Rory Sutherland.
Great game.
So good. And then Jimmy Carr, I learned that laughter is a sign of whose side you're on. So when they're not laughing at you, it's very clear they're not with you. But that's part of the process. I love it. You need to embrace the work in progress, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Half-baked is better than raw. Because if you think that your first draft has to be perfect, you will never publish it. And you will be deemed as silent until your inner critic feels you're worthy enough to speak.
Yeah. I think that's where most people stumble and don't make that first leap, right? So they don't ever take the first step because they've overthought it, and they've thought about, well, for the podcasts, for example, if I put myself out online, I'm speaking to random people on the internet, people are going to laugh at me, think this about me, they're going to think I'm weird because I'm prepping on a Friday night or editing on a Saturday night, whatever it is. But just doing the thing is is that first step. And I think that's the biggest step to take. And I don't know about you, but I know when I started the podcast, I overthought it for a while. And eventually I just like, right, I've got to just record now and just do it. Because once I start to do it, I'll learn as I go. And I've learned along the way. I've learned from yourself. So, and I'll continue to learn forevermore. So yeah, it's that sort of taking the first step is the biggest point, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's a story. All the failures, all the work in progress is a story. And I really think the reward isn't the goal, it's the process. It's not about the starting point, it's not about the end, it's not about the reward, it's about the character that you become in the way, the story that you get to tell in retrospect. That's why we love autobiographies. They've never expired. Autobiographies are never out of fashion. It's why we love superhero films, because of the grit and the glory. And whether that's on a micro level in people's day-to-day jobs, every day they might hate their boss, they might hate the Excel spreadsheet they're doing, but you can find a way to turn that into a story. Every little action that you do is a word. Every day is a sentence. Every week is a page, and every month is a chapter. And unfortunately, it's either a blessing or a curse that there's no eraser, but it's written in the finest quilted pen. And I guess the question to your audience is, are you happy with the story that you're writing? Because you can't erase it. And someone's going to read it one day, and you're living it. And whether it's comedy, whether it's podcasting, each action, each failure, each setback, each triumph is part of that story, and it's yours to keep. It's a baton in a forever relay race that you can pass on to the next, and the next.
Yeah. Looking back at your time doing your podcast, so you're 133 episodes in, it's about 4 years you've been doing it or so. What's the toughest point been for you during that time? Has there ever been a point where you've not thought you can carry on with it?
Yes. My podcast is the most committed, constant, and secure relationship I've ever had. I love novelty and intensity, but it's the one thing that's been the spine over the last few years. Like I said, it's taken me from literally zero money in a council estate bedroom, my dad being an alcoholic down the stairs, my mum had just passed away, we're in lockdown, to meeting the most incredible people, my heroes. Whether it's Sir Tom Hunter, the guy I mentioned in my origin story, whether it's Jimmy Carr, Rory Sutherland.
I thought you were going to say me, but
Sam.
carry on.
And that has only ever been enabled through persistence. But I guess a struggle that I've had is this entitlement. I keep thinking, like, why have I not exploded yet? Why am I not the diary of the CEO? And I've seen different points in my career whereby I've had that feeling, and now I look back at that point and realize I was never worthy of that. And what feels like delusion now is actually so sensibly mapped in retrospect. This journey's been like sitting backwards on a train. The landscape has only revealed itself once I've passed it. So there's so many points where I've had this entitlement of why am I not a breakthrough star yet? But it's now only that I can compare back to that council estate version of myself. I realize how far I've come. Yeah. And if I continue playing this game the way I'm playing it, would I be happy to know that I will make it as long as it takes another 11 years? Am I willing to have this constant relationship for another 11 years, for example? Yes, I fucking would. I look back at Amelia de Moldenberg from Chicken Shop Date, and I looked at her first upload, and it was 2014. And I just kind of nodded my hat and just smiled at the fact that she's been playing the long game. What we see her doing now, the red carpet experiences, the virality, that started in a real chicken shop with Getz in 2014.
Yep.
And I need to remember that I'm not entitled to shit. I can be consistent, but I can also be consistently shit. And I just need to refine, reiterate, be consistent, and play the long game.
comparing yourself to yourself as well, you said in there. So that's the important thing, isn't it? To look back at where you were, not where someone else is. And I think we look at other people, and it's so easy to do it on social media now as well, where you look at other people doing the same thing as you and wondering why you haven't got what they've got, maybe. But you can only ever compare yourself to yourself. It's useful to look at them and learn from them, but with that entitlement thing that you spoke about as well, you're not entitled to that until you're ready for it, essentially.
And you may only want it because they want it. Or you may only want it because you think they want you to want it. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
And it's a lesson I wish I could learn 3D opposed to people telling me in 2D. Almost you have to have those experiences to realize you never wanted them to begin with. And one thing I love is that we all have more in common than we think. We all live under the same sky. There's no point comparing yourself to everyone else because we all have a very similar existence. Our stories are like our arseholes. We all have one. And yeah, we all live under the same sky. And comparison is useless. It really is. Unless you're comparing yourself to a previous version of yourself. That's all that really matters.
Yeah.
And even that is not always the greatest thing to do. I've been trying to be more grounded and present, realizing that all I own right now is this moment right here. Thinking too much about the past. As much as I need to embrace my origin story, I don't need to live there. I need to use it as like a GPS. Study it, so then the landscape becomes clearer, and I know the routes. I know where the gaps are so I can form the bridges, but I don't need to live there. I use it as my compass, not my crutch. But fantasizing over the future, what's the point worrying about where I'm going when I'm going to get there all along?
Yeah.
What's the point of worrying about the man that I think I should be when I'm becoming the man I need to be genetically? Like, there's a genetic roadmap that I'm following. I'm going to become that man whether I like it or not. What's the point obsessing over it when I'm going to get there all along? And not to sound so Buddhist in nature, but all I own is this moment right here with you, Sam. And maybe a lesson to the listeners is like, just open your eyes, take stock of where they are right now.
Yeah.
And this is the magic. This is all we have. This is all we own.
Let's turn and look at the positives and the highlights of your journey so far. So you've told us about where it started, and I can see why it resonates with so many people, because as you said, when you got into that sort of top 4 company, people don't tend to come from those backgrounds as much. You don't hear people who sound like you. So understanding why people resonate with that, I can 100% see. Whilst you've been on that journey, what are the highlights for you? What are the bits that really made you sort of grateful in that moment?
Great question. I feel grateful when I can be a cog and playing a part of unlocking an experience for someone else. That experience can either be intrinsic or extrinsic. So through the podcasts that I produce, I love it when listeners or people who are in my ecosystem hear something and unlock a version of their inner self. Whether it's a triumph or a trauma, being a moving part and allowing them to discover that, to discover self, is great. I think an origin story is the discovery of self through the detour of another. And being a part of that is fantastic and worthwhile.
Yeah.
For me, it's my life's work.
Mm.
And then extrinsically, being able to take Howie, Andres, even my sister to London to meet Jimmy Carr or Rory Sutherland, and seeing them categorize it as the best day of their life.
Yeah.
Like young Howie is a 21-year-old psychology student who's my video editor. And he's so bought into this mission that, like, I wake up in the morning and he's edited 3 things proactively just because he wants to put out work. he's sacrificing his evenings when he should be at the pub getting rat arse drunk with his mates or going on dates with girls from Tinder. I don't know what he'd get up to at the age of 21. But instead of doing that, he's editing for me. He's editing for Origin Story. And it's a privilege to know that he's spending his 20s, the best decade of his life, on this journey alongside me.
Mm.
And he is phenomenal, man. He is the coolest kid on the block, man. I love that guy. He's like, I owe him so much for believing in this. And my job is to give him a story that he's proud of sharing. When he's 80, I hope that he looks back on this small period, this couple of years of his life, and is grateful that he gets to have that chapter.
Mm.
So being able to share some of the ephemeral experiences, these trips to London, these shoots or whatever, and more often than not, I'm paying out of pocket to make those things work. Knowing that I get to give that to him or play a part of making that happen for him. And my sister, when she's joined me with Jimmy Carter or Andres on these shoots, the videographer, that's amazing, man. That's rich. That's so rich.
Yeah.
I'm not rich. I don't make a lot of money. Yeah. I spend a lot of money on podcasting. But I'm rich, man.
Yeah.
This mission's rich. This is rich. Doing this.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure this is your ultimate wealth.
Yeah.
I know you have
so
a great job.
Yeah.
Very fulfilling job, public facing job. But I can imagine this is your currency.
Yeah. Well, this is scaling up of what I do. So obviously working as a firefighter, briefly doing the phones on the Samaritans as well for a year. It's another way to help people, and it sounds so cheesy and horrible to say out loud almost, but it is a way to scale up who I can reach and a different way of helping people as well. I don't always have to help people on the worst day of their life. I can now get into their ears and provide them with stories and knowledge, hopefully in the medium of a podcast.
What moments do you feel grateful for on the podcast?
I like seeing a guest open up about things that they've not spoken about before.
Why does that matter to you?
I suppose it's a sort of, it's a nice thing to know that you've made it to that point where they're comfortable to speak about things like that and to be open and to share it obviously with me, but also with my audience and the people listening. And I also, the after effect of it, as I'm sure you're aware, the messages you get, people telling you that they really enjoyed a specific episode or part of an episode that really resonated with them. So yeah, hearing things that resonate with me, hearing things that resonate with others that are listening, I think those are probably the most rewarding parts for me at the moment.
People give up their power when they think they don't have any. And I think by having a podcast like yours, perhaps like mine, people find their power. People that are the guests have a breakthrough that puts a smile on their face because they realize it's their power. And if they don't do that, then the listeners feel like they might have power. And each individual story is like a pixel. And combining all of these pixels, all of these stories, is what makes a TV function in full color. Yeah. And you're part of that journey. You're doing that. Each episode that you put out there is a pixel, creating an amazing soap opera that, with not even a soap opera, an Oscar-winning feature film with an award-winning actor that no one else can play.
David, it's been awesome. I want to bring it into the last bit then. So I leave my listeners with a question from the guest. And the idea of this is so that they can go away and start a conversation with someone else. So I used to like doing that after listening to podcasts, going and having conversations. If you could leave them with a question, what question would that be?
If life is truly like a movie, a hero's journey, much like Spider-Man's radioactive spider moment, what is yours? What's the one pivot, pain, moment of triumph in your life that defines you, that is your competitive advantage that no one else has? What is that? Where do you feel power? How do you feel power? And how can you share that power?
David McIntosh, thank you. Where can people find you online if they want to keep up to date with what you're doing?
They can find me at home. They can follow me home if they want. I'm heading to Glasgow on a flight tonight. They can find me at David McIntosh Jr. That's David McIntosh. Spelled MCI, not MACK.
I'll tag it all below for anyone who doesn't know how to spell it. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on. Anyone listening who wants to share this episode with anyone who think they might enjoy it, please do share it with a friend, family member, whoever. You can also follow the podcast wherever you're listening, and also on Instagram at Lonely Chapter Podcast. And lastly from me, thank you for listening and stay curious.